Your orders, Herr Doctor.
The year is 1992. id Software had acquired the license of Wolfenstein on the cheap and managed to turn it around, not only bringing new life to the name Wolfenstein, but becoming a huge milestone in gaming history. While technically not the first FPS, it's recognized as the grandfather of first-person shooters. As id built up its successes with games like Doom and Quake, it begged one question: how are you going to follow up such a revolutionary game? On November 19th, 2001, Grey Matter Interactive set out to make it happen. This is my review of Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Prior to working on Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Grey Matter Interactive were perhaps best known for Redneck Rampage as well as Quake 2's mission pack, The Reckoning. They would later become merged into Treyarch, so like Raven Software, they've got some level of connection to the Call of Duty franchise. However, unlike Wolfenstein 2009, Return to Castle Wolfenstein doesn't feel much like Call of Duty. The more realistic aesthetic and overall mission structure can arguably be a little similar, but that's a very vague similarity at best, and I'd say it's a little more reminiscent of Medal of Honor for the PlayStation 1. With things like completely static health and secret rooms, this game would seem to have a much sharper connection to Wolfenstein 3D than would later games, which would only make sense since it's the next game in the series after Wolfenstein 3D after all. There are certainly more than a few winks and nods to that original game, such as eating food to restore health and starting out in a prison cell next to a guard that Blazkowicz already shivved, giving you instant access to a pistol. The game also takes inspiration from the original Castle Wolfenstein by Muse Software, in that the game is very accommodating to players who would prefer to stealth along. Unfortunately, this leads to two annoying missions that are absolutely stealth mandatory, but thankfully they're not too long, and being able to quick save, a feature missing in Wolfenstein 2009, certainly helps. Now granted, that can be a curse just as much as it is a blessing, because some guards you didn't even know about may have spotted you when you quick saved and forced you to restart the entire mission over again. I had to learn this lesson the hard way, so don't quick save on the first stealth mission unless you're absolutely sure nobody saw you. Ironically, one of these stealth missions would be followed up by a timed mission because some missiles are about to launch and you have to stop them. Blazkowicz has a rather interesting little set of weapons to work with. You start out with a knife and a kick, and as I mentioned before, you quickly gain access to a pistol due to a guard that Blazkowicz already took out. Along the way, you gain access to submachine rifles and later a rocket launcher. Pretty standard stuff. One interesting thing is that there's a sniper rifle with an infrared scope, and it really helps during that first stealth mission if you can find it. Another weapon of note is the Sten submachine gun. It's silenced so you can kill enemies more easily without alerting others, but at the cost of overheating fairly quickly. Obviously, it's not the kind of gun meant for taking on waves of enemies. You're supposed to only use it to pick off enemies so they can't see you, so it works for what it is. Just like in Wolfenstein 3D, you get a very beefy minigun in the form of the Venom gun, although, like the Sten, it can overheat if you hold down the trigger too long. You also gain a flamethrower, as well as a very useful Tesla gun that sticks to enemies, which makes it perfect for people with bad aim, aka me. Naturally, grenades are among your equipment, and amusingly you can also get dynamite, although the latter is rare to use and not the most useful weapon to have. As always, foot troops will comprise the majority of enemies you face, but there's also a few more interesting opponents. You also have the Elite Guard, which are badass patsy women that can be quite nimble on their feet, although there exists a long-range variant to hit you from afar as well. Funny enough, they also appeared in Wolfenstein 2009, but none of Machine Games' Wolfenstein games so far. I guess they didn't want to compromise all of that more serious drama tone they were clearly going for. Proto-soldiers are very dangerous cybernetic soldiers, and they can be armed with either the Venom minigun or a rocket launcher. Cover is an absolute necessity when dealing with these beasts, because if you're caught in the open, they can kill you really damn fast. Then of course there's the Super Soldier, more the final product of the prototypes. In addition to the previous two weapons, this bad boy is also armed with a Tesla gun and is introduced as a boss. And of course there are also undead enemies, including a variant that is on fire and very dangerous. The finale boss, Henrich I, is an evil warlord armed with a sword and dark magic, as well as being surrounded by undead knights. Some of the levels can come off as a bit cramped, but overall the gameplay just feels good. It has a very classic FPS feel to it, again reminding me a little more of Medal of Honor for the PS1 than anything else, so if you like that game, you'll feel right at home here. The two mandatory stealth missions may mar it a little bit, but it's still very great gameplay. Return to Castle Wolfenstein is a complete reboot of the previous game's story. The Patsies have formed a supernatural division, and Blazkowicz is sent in by the Office of Secret Actions, aka the OSA, to figure out what they're doing and put a stop to it. Sadly, unlike Wolfenstein 3D, the Führer himself doesn't make a direct appearance in this game. However, in his place is a ferocious paranormal leader known as Mariana Blavatsky with her underling Helga von Bülow. This game also marks the introduction of Death's Head, the infamous patsy scientist who would reappear in 2009 and the New Order. As mentioned before, Blazkowicz starts out in a cell and must fight his way out of Castle Wolfenstein before meeting up with the German resistance in a village close by. It seems the patsies have released an ancient curse, awakening countless of the undead. The entrance is sealed by the patsies, though Blazkowicz blasts it open and hops on in, mowing his way through both the undead and some unfortunate patsies that were trapped inside with them. After making his way through a church, Helga von Bülow gets her hands on an ancient dagger. This turns out to be her undoing, as it awakens another undead creature that promptly kills her. Unlike later games, including Wolfenstein 2009, the patsies seem portrayed as mostly incompetent in this game for the most part, and in over their heads. Clearly, they're messing with supernatural forces that they can't begin to comprehend. The one exception to this seems to be Death's Head, who isn't in any way on board with the supernatural paranormal division. Rather, he's focused on his super soldier project, which to his credit works just as intended. The one factor he didn't count on was Blazkowicz being an unstoppable killing machine and destroying them, after which he flees into a rocket, never to be seen again, until Wolfenstein 2009. In continuing with the aforementioned streak of incompetence, Mariana awakens Heinrich I, the very powerful warlord that took Simon the Wanderer and all of his followers to seal him up. As his way of saying thanks, Heinrich proceeds to turn her into his undead slave. It seems as though even the patsies themselves can fall prey to this age-old rule about not putting your trust in wicked forces. It will always screw you over in the end. Fortunately, a very powerful group of wizards apparently don't have jack crap on one very muscular American and his handy-dandy minigun. After one last battle, Heinrich is obliterated outright. With his plans now in ruins, Himmler essentially shakes his fist in the air and leaves. With Operation Resurrection officially shut down, Blazkowicz goes on vacation in the only way he knows how, mowing down patsies. As I've said in the past, I prefer Blazkowicz when he's painted as a badass. I understand the merit behind having a sympathetic protagonist, but there's no shortage of games, especially war-based shooters, with those. If you ask me, Wolfenstein should be the more tongue-in-cheek franchise, and RTCW does a beautiful job here. Return to Castle Wolfenstein was built on a modified id Tech 3 engine, the engine best known for Quake 3. Being made in 2001, it obviously hasn't aged quite as gracefully as Wolfenstein 2009 or later games, at least not graphically, but it holds up better than you'd think for being over 17 years old. The environments mostly consist of villages, ancient castles and tombs, and military complexes. It does have a few welcome reversions, however, such as outdoors in broad daylight, an Arctic environment, and the finale level of the game has you going through a wooded area in the middle of the night before facing Heinrich in a stone arena type area. The characters sort of remind me of GoldenEye 64 in that they appear to be photographs or at least approximations of actual faces textured onto the chunky models, although there's obviously a lot more polygons to work with here, so it's not as jarring. Unlike 2009, the text logs aren't voiced, but the game more than makes up for it by having plenty of voice dialogue in the cutscenes and the game itself. It's not uncommon to hear guards talk among themselves as long as you stay hidden, which really helps add to the atmosphere of the game and make it feel alive.
Are you still trying to start that generator? No, I'm working on my upper body strength, one arm at a time. I bet it's because of the gold. Tell me, do you often make such shrewd observations? You should seriously consider officers training.
As I mentioned in my review of Wolfenstein 2009, the OSA segment was taken from that game, and unlike that game, they actually appear between each level. Typically, they're congratulating Blazkowicz on what he managed to accomplish, as well as informing him what needs to be done next.
Now, how is Agent Blazkowicz?
A little beat up, sir, but nothing too serious. They've just finished with him in debriefing.
Well, he certainly came through for us this time. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable.
The OSA segments give an air of seriousness about the whole thing, but then you look at most of the patsies being completely incompetent and it just goes into silly territory. It provides a pretty good balance between silly and serious, and also helps to contrast the patsies against the more competent good guys. While it may look dated by today's standards, it still holds up well enough. Return to Castle Wolfenstein is a game that's still held in high regard, and with very good reason. As it stands, it's my favorite Wolfenstein in the series. It has a very good mixture of old-school shooting action with a very fine-tuned tone that manages to be both serious and wacky at the same time. Wolfenstein 3D may be the grandfather of first-person shooters and arguably the much more influential entry in the series, but I personally think Return to Castle Wolfenstein has aged much better. Fortunately, unlike the 2009 entry, Return to Castle Wolfenstein hasn't been removed from Steam, so I definitely recommend giving it a try.